Do you like Greg's, Whippets, addressing regional inequality and boiling centrist piss? Then join the Northern Independence Party. We joke, but we're serious.
I'm here. We can start the video now. The UK is a special place, for a lot of reasons. It has a very particular political culture that expresses itself in increasingly ridiculous and absurd ways. And if you follow British politics, first of all, why? Secondly, you probably know that there's a great tradition of satirical candidates, single issue parties, and just whatever this is meant to be. Sometimes, though, a joke can get out of hand, like a party you have when you're a teenager and your parents are away, only instead of your house being wrecked, you end up like Poland and elect a party who want to solve alcoholism by encouraging British-style pubs and beer instead of vodka. Yes, that happened, and once the party entered office, it very quickly dissolved and moved on to various endeavours, though not before splitting into a large beer and small beer faction, which if I had to throw my weight behind one, you can put me on #Team Large Beer. The latest in this long and proud tradition seems to be the Northern Independence Party, who started out as a Twitter page after Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham showed a surprising amount of backbone in reaction to the central UK government giving his city less funding than the rest of the country to support them during restrictions imposed because of the pandemic. On the surface, the idea of an independent North will seem odd to you, or sound like something straight out of Game of Thrones, and while the area claimed by the NIP has been independent in the past, that hasn't really been the case since 954. And their social media operation has served to wind up some of the worst people on the internet. In fact, you can learn a bit more about these people on one of my old videos, hint hint. And they've even managed to get a former Labour MP to run for them in a parliamentary by-election. But the questions that occur to me are, could this work? Why do we have seemingly absurd parties appearing as a response to the political situation in the UK? What are the limitations of the approach of the NIP? And maybe I'll even give you my prediction for the Hartlepool by-election, so stick around for that. Britain, nothing like the clowns you know. The UK is, as I seem to have to keep saying to myself, a very special place, just not in the way that a lot of people like to believe. One of the things I keep encountering during my book review streams, where I usually take a book by a terrible melt and decide to drive myself mad by trying to analyse their nonsense, is that there's a belief that the UK is, and I want you all to sit down for this, a place that other countries envy for our good governance and lack of corruption. Damn it. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. I really don't understand. Sorry about that. It seems laughable if you pay any reasonable attention to UK politics to think that anyone inside of a country, never mind outside of it, could hold that position. But it exists, and it is kind of hilarious. Though I do think it's worth pointing out that this view of the UK may exist because no one is getting arrested and thrown in jail for their corruption, while that might be more likely in other countries we perceive as more corrupt. There's also this idea that the UK is a normal country. No, not in the normal island sense of normal, though the shirt is much more accurate. If you just look at the outcomes the British political system has produced, you'd be hard-pressed to believe that this is a functional place and not just an elaborate joke played at the expense of anyone who's cursed enough to be trapped on this island. Think about it. In 2019, the UK granted a mop-head dipshit who was a host on a comedy show, wrote an outrageously racist book, and reportedly threatened to have journalists beaten up, an 80-seat majority. In 2015, the Labour leader at that election, Ed Miliband, had his political reputation damaged because he was photographed eating a bacon sandwich somewhat awkwardly. I mean, who looks graceful eating a bacon sandwich anyway? Never mind that there are some pretty unsettling undertones of the press making Jewish man eats bacon sandwich strangely a thing. In the 90s, the Conservatives led by John Major led a Back to Basics campaign, which was an attempt to pitch towards socially conservative values, or as it was put at the time, neighbourliness, decency, courtesy. And then it came out that his entire government was the sleaziest group of motherfuckers, and thanks to the magic of Twitter, we can now speculate on whether John Major, who remember was leading the government pitching for social conservative values, was pegged by the MP he was having an affair with in the 80s. There's so much more I could go through, but if I was writing a comedy about a rainy island filled with curtain-twitching bumbling pricks as their ruling class, you'd say this was all too on the nose. So you're presented with a system that produces absurd outcomes, and so people, understandably, will be absurd in response. If you follow British elections, you'll probably be interested in the official monster raving loony party, who during the 2005 general election were the only party to send a candidate to my school to talk to us about politics. Which maybe explains a lot about how it's panned out since for me. 11-year-old me listening to a man who was dressed as a banana explain electoral politics leading to this makes an awful lot of sense. Or if you're American, and you like John Oliver, who I'm told is some kind of comedian, you probably know about Lord Buckethead. And it's funny, right, that Theresa May had to stand there next to a man wearing a bin on his head, or that Tim Farron had to deal with whatever the fuck that is. All of this is fun and harmless, and that's the thing. It's harmless. Very few satirical candidates or joke parties are trying to connect to a serious material issue, which means that they can be these quirky curiosities which most of us can safely ignore. And part of why these harmless parties keep cropping up is because of first past the post, but more about that later. What if you confronted the absurdity of the UK with absurdity, but you connected it to a real, measurable material issue? What would come out of that? And why, in the case of the Northern Independence Party, has it led to this disproportionate attention and reaction? We joke, but we're serious. If you found your way here, you probably know what shitposting is. But in case you don't, I highly recommend Tom Nicholas's excellent video where he goes into it in quite a bit more detail than I'm about to. The short summary is that shitposting is an art, where the idea is to put minimal effort into a post in order to generate the largest possible reaction or to derail an ongoing conversation. So for example, you may see an incredibly poor take and respond to it with pig poop balls. Maybe taking the shit in shitposting a bit too literally, but that's the general way that you would go about doing it. One of the things that the NIP Twitter account has done is capture attention, and one of the tweets that particularly caught my attention is this one.
We joke, but we're serious. Keir Starmer is serious, but he's a joke.
Which goes well with the idea I've presented, which is that the UK is an absurd place, and the Labour leader Keir Starmer is a perfect manifestation of the way the UK is a joke. So you might be asking, why is The Times, for better or worse, definitely worse, one of Britain's most influential legacy media outlets, running an article on a party that is tied to a seemingly absurd demand? The Times and the former Labour staffer who wrote the article are voluntarily allowing themselves to become part of the circus, and they're doing it because of the power of shitposting. I mean, just look at these tweets and tell me that you think they were time-consuming to create or high effort.
Keith. Look, if we're going to assist the Saudi war on Yemen, I want every bomb that falls to be British. Good old British bomb. None of those foreign bombs, no. British bomb.
We are the third party!
Survation poll, Hartlepool. Con, 49%. Lab, 42%. NIP,
2%.
LD, 1%. Reform, 1%.
So it's all low effort, non-time consuming content that gets a reaction. That's fine, lots of people do it. They don't then run a former Labour MP as a candidate at a by-election. So why did that happen? Partly it's because the ham-in-chief, Keith, is fucking useless. But it's also because they've tied the demand for Northern independence, which is an admittedly fringe position in the UK as of recording, to a real material issue that's the North-South divide, which is a thing that pretty much everyone in, around, and observing British politics agrees is a thing. Like, Boris Johnson doesn't talk about levelling up if there isn't a level above to reach being experienced elsewhere in the country. That means they have two big advantages. On the one hand, they wind up the exact group of people who are invested in politics being a fun game between two moderately opposed forces who largely agree on everything. Those people have large platforms that can extend into the mainstream. So getting them to react exposes the Northern Independence Party to audiences who may not be sympathetic in general, but they can point to these establishment figures who showed themselves up in the past few years and use them as a recruiting tool. The other advantage is that by tying their demand for Northern independence to the material reality, it forces those commentators to address their concerns somewhat seriously. You can't credibly dismiss the idea of a North-South divide within England. It is the material reality. And while the British press is pretty good at ignoring reality, it's not that good. At least not yet. Especially when a lot of the mainstream press have been pushing the caricature of the Red Wall, which they use to project their own ideas onto. And wouldn't you be surprised, those ideas are often very right-wing and dripping in bigotry, despite some polling evidence to suggest that the people of Hartlepool maybe don't align with that in its entirety. This is a good time to ask ourselves an important question. Why now? Why has this particular joke party managed to capture the attention and perhaps the imagination of some people? After all, there have been a fair few parties who have advocated for various flavours of Northern independence. Satirical parties and candidates are 10 a penny in the UK. If I had to provide my best explanation, it's this. There is a demand for politics that is radical in the UK, and as of recording, that demand is only really being met by one side of the political spectrum. The NIP may not cost Labour seats directly. They may regard it as a joke, but the joke is being tied to something serious that there is a consensus on. The North-South divide is real, it's serious, and there's a significant group of people who want to engage with politics without the misery of having to be serious all the goddamn time. So the issue they're centering is being taken seriously alongside their name. That combination is powerful, and shitposting isn't alienating since most people have a sense of humour, and most people in the North know that this divide exists. Combine that with an enthusiastic activist base, maybe you start to have something there. Limitations. I hate to do this, because I do like the NIP. They are phenomenal posters, but there are limitations to this approach, especially as a party that intends to contest elections. There is the fact that Twitter on its own isn't really that popular a website when compared to Facebook, and Facebook is very much a home on social media for the right and the boomer-brained. So not really the natural constituency for a party like the NIP who identify as Democratic Socialist. So, even though their social media game is excellent, getting traction using it with the section of the electorate who disproportionately vote is a challenge. There's also the first-past-the-post sized elephant in the room. It is a ruthless and unforgiving system. While the simplicity of most votes wins can open up opportunities for third or new parties, especially in low turnout contests such as council elections, where a few hundred votes could yield a seat. But at the parliamentary level in the UK, it's a bit more difficult. The NIP can take some comfort from the fact that first past the post works to the advantage of parties who have a particular demographic or region that tends to vote for them, but they have to get them voting for them first. I've spoken a little bit about the media interaction with the party, and while any publicity is good publicity is a fair doctrine within reason, if you've watched any previous video of mine, you'll know that the press, particularly the commentariat, are incredibly wedded to the status quo, and either implicitly or explicitly right-wing orthodoxy. So the NIP will need to be the party that finally figures out how to get around the press and speak directly to the people. A difficult task for anyone, but for a party that's pitching Northern independence, let's just say I'm glad I'm not their press officer right now. The example of the Scottish National Party is often brought up as the model for the NIP, and while the SNP are quite a unique party in their recent dominance of the country, it's worth remembering that the SNP had a lot of struggles from its foundation to becoming Scotland's dominant political party, only continuously having MPs in the House of Commons from 1967, 33 years after its foundation. So if the NIP is to have a shot at impacting British politics, it really needs staying power. Can they succeed? Whether the NIP can succeed is an interesting question. Based on what I've presented, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's all good, clean, fun, but it'll fizzle out. I'm not so sure. With the Labour Party determined to hug the Tories in an attempt to win votes directly from them, there's quite a big gap to the left of Labour, and there's also a gap for someone who's just having a bit of fun with it. It's also important to remember what success will look like for a party that started as a Twitter page polling 2% in Hartlepool off the back of shitposting is fun, and as of recording the ground game hasn't really begun, which is perhaps a bit forgivable given the pandemic. To me, success for the NIP has already been achieved. They've gained publicity, they've managed to get a former Labour MP, Thelma Walker, to run as their candidate. Whether the NIP itself is going to be the vehicle for this brand of politics going forward is up for debate. It's not unheard of for regionalist and separatist parties that are highlighting regional inequality to become national forces. The party that springs to mind is the HDP in Turkey. Despite them being the successor of long-established parties and political currents, that might be a favourable comparison if the NIP don't quite make it to Northern independence. So perhaps the NIP is only the first iteration of this. Perhaps there's more to come. Only time will tell. I just want to thank Ross and Tim for lending their voices to the tweets and to the opening of this video. Tim is one of the longer term friends of my stream. He made the base image for the thumbnail and really just does most of my graphics. So thank you, Tim, for making up for my great shortcomings there. Ross is just getting properly started on Twitch, so I encourage you all to follow him on there. twitch.tv/MrGump_. The link will be in the description. I also want to thank my partner who provided a very good and not at all stem-brained set of insights on the script, Teo, who I'm going to apologise to for putting them through the early draft of this without commas, and Mick Wright, who provided some very positive feedback. You can find some links to those excellent people and some of their even better work down below. Otherwise, I did promise you all a prediction for the Hartlepool by-election, and let's just say I don't think we've reached peak banter yet, and there might be something interesting to come from it. So let's wait and see, and if you're in Hartlepool watching this, why not give the NIP a shot? It's not like you have anything to lose between the MILF-checking Labour MP and another faceless Tory.